He wasn't undocumented. Yohan was going to work. His daughter was in the car wearing bluey pajamas, for God's sake.
On the morning of July 13, 2026, a white car pulled away from a house in Biddeford, Maine, and within minutes, the man behind the wheel was dead in the road. As new details emerged, one revelation stood out above everything else. The man who died was never the person agents had come for. Let's get into the details. 7 in the morning. Biddeford sits on the coast, south of Portland, and on that Monday morning it was doing what it does on any Monday morning. People were leaving for work. The sun was already up. According to the account released after the fact, ICE agents were conducting targeted surveillance on an address in the city. The address was linked to a person subject to a final order of removal, which is the legal term for a deportation order that has run out of appeals. That person was the reason the agents were there. That person is the detail to hold on to, because that person is not the person this story is about. At around 7 in the morning, a white car left the residence. Agents moved to stop it. It is worth pausing on what that means in practice, because it becomes the center of everything that follows. A vehicle stop is not a raid, and it is not an arrest at a door. It is agents in plain vehicles moving to box in or halt a car that is already in motion on a public street, with a driver who, in many cases, has no way of knowing who is stopping him or why. There is no uniform on a porch, and no warrant read out loud. There is a car, and then there are other cars, and then there are seconds. What happened in those seconds is where the accounts separate. The version given by ICE and the Department of Homeland Security is that the vehicle tried to flee the scene, that it accelerated toward an officer, and that the agent fired because he feared for public safety. The round struck the driver. The driver was Joan Sebastian Duran Guerrero. His name appears in some reports as Johan, and in others as Joan Sebastian Guerrero, and the spelling shifts depending on which outlet you read, which is its own small signal of how fast this story moved. He was a Colombian national. He was 25 or 26 years old, depending on the report. He was a father. Reports mention a 3-year-old daughter. One account states she was in the car, and he was not the target of the operation. He had entered the United States in 2023, reportedly without authorization. In 2025, he received work authorization, and according to advocates and his family, a social security number along with it. He worked as a food delivery driver. He also worked as a cleaner. The people who knew him described a man who worked and went home, with no reported criminal history and no reported history of violence. So the file on him contained 2 facts that would be pulled in opposite directions for the rest of the week. He had crossed into the country outside the legal process. He had also been issued papers by that same government that let him work, and he had used them to do exactly that, delivering food and cleaning buildings in a city that knew his face. That is the shape of the person who was in the car. Now, here is the shape of what the cameras caught. Security and surveillance footage captured parts of the incident and its immediate aftermath, including agents pulling him from the vehicle. Bystander accounts and bystander video showed his body in the street. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The officer involved was placed on leave, and in the reports that followed, there was no mention of body cameras. Not that the footage was withheld or under review or being processed. There simply was not any, because the agents were not wearing them. So the record of the most contested seconds of that morning came down to a fixed security camera mounted for another purpose entirely, whatever a neighbor happened to film after the fact, and the account of the agents themselves. A security camera does not follow the action. It points to where it was screwed in, and it captures what passes through its frame, which means the parts it missed are gone. One of the people who saw the street that morning was a resident named Kyle Billings. He saw the body. He would be out in the protests later, and he was not the only person on that block who went from witness to demonstrator inside of a few hours. By that point, word was already moving through the city, and it was moving with a specific set of facts attached, not the version that would be argued about on television for the rest of the week. The version the neighbors had: a man who was going to work, a man who was not who they were looking for, a child in the back seat. Here is one of the voices that carried it.
He wasn't undocumented. Yohan was going to work. His daughter was in the car wearing bluey pajamas, for God's sake.
That was the version of the morning that reached Biddeford first, and it reached Biddeford before any official statement did. There was one more piece of context sitting underneath all of it, and it mattered. This was not an isolated event on the national timeline. It was the second fatal ICE-involved shooting in under a week, following one in Houston, Texas, involving a Mexican immigrant during a traffic stop. 2 men, 2 vehicle stops, 6 days apart. That pattern is what lifted Biddeford out of the local news cycle within hours. One shooting is an incident that gets reviewed. 2 in a week, both of them at the side of a road, both of them during the enforcement push the Trump administration had been running all year, is a question about method. It put a set of questions on the table that had been building for months, about how far a vehicle stop should be allowed to go, about what an agent is permitted to do when a car moves, and about why the agents making those stops were not recording any of it. By that afternoon, nobody in Maine was waiting for the answers to arrive on their own. The city walks. Biddeford did not wait a day. It did not wait for a press conference, a preliminary finding, or a name confirmed by a federal agency. The city moved the same afternoon, and it moved on foot. They gathered at Mechanics Park, which is exactly what it sounds like, a working city's public square in a working city's downtown. Hundreds came. They brought candles, and they brought handmade signs with messages of support for migrants. And then they did the thing that turns a gathering into a statement. They started walking. The march went to the office of Senator Susan Collins. And what happened outside that office is the sound that defined the week. The chants came in waves, layered on top of each other, the way chants do when a crowd is big enough to lose its own edges. Ice out, no more ice, abolish ICE. Some of the crowd pushed through into the foyer of the building. That is the oldest chant in American protest, and it showed up in Biddeford within hours of the shooting, which tells you how quickly this stopped being a local story about a traffic stop and became something the crowd understood as part of a much longer line. That chant was the whole demand compressed into 4 words, and it was not aimed at a policy or a procedure. It was aimed at a presence. Representative Chellie Pingree was there, and she called for an investigation. Troy Jackson, the former state Senate leader and now a candidate, stood in the crowd holding an Abolish ICE sign and chanted along with everyone else. This is the part that separated Biddeford from a routine demonstration. The elected officials were not observing from a respectful distance and issuing a measured statement afterward. They were inside the crowd, holding the signs. Outside Collins' office, the tone sharpened. Protesters screamed obscenities at the building. And then, over and over, a chant that was less a demand than a countdown. Vote her out. Collins is a Republican, and she had called for transparency and accountability in the shooting. That was not enough for the people on the sidewalk. Some Democrats had already gone after her for her support of ICE funding, and the crowd outside her door had made the same connection without needing anyone to explain it to them. To them, the money and the mourning were the same story. Then the thing spread. Portland went out with its own version of No More ICE. Scarborough gathered outside an ICE facility, which put the demonstration directly at the doorstep of the agency itself. Boston joined, so did Waterville, so did Hallowell, a town of a few thousand people on the Kennebec River, which is not a place that makes national news for street demonstrations. The signs got more specific as the days went on. No more ICE killings. Stop the murder. The word choice was deliberate, and it was a claim, not a description. Nothing had been determined by any investigation. The crowd was not waiting for one. Running underneath all of it was a phrase the protesters kept returning to. Biddeford, they said, is a city of immigrants. That was the argument in its simplest form. Not an abstract position on federal enforcement policy, but a claim about who actually lives on those streets, and about who was now afraid to drive down them at 7 in the morning. And as the crowd grew, the chant stopped being about the agency alone, and started reaching for something older and much heavier. That is a chant with decades behind it, and pulling it out on a Maine sidewalk in 2026 was a deliberate act of comparison, placing a federal agency in a line the crowd expected everyone listening to recognize.
Immigrants are welcome here! We say no to ICE and fear!
And that one is the counterweight. Because underneath the anger, the crowd kept circling back to a simple claim about the character of their own town. Some of it turned heated, but in those first actions, reports noted no major violence and no arrests. And in among the chanting, there were people trying to explain, on camera, why they had walked out of their houses.
How many more murders do we need by ICE? This is becoming normalized, and it's not okay.
That word normalized is doing quiet work in that sentence. The fear on that street was not that this was extraordinary. It was that it was starting to feel ordinary.
Hey, we're not going to stand with it.
Joanne's life mattered, and Lorenzo's life mattered.
2 names in one breath, from a speaker who was linking Maine to what had happened days earlier in Texas, and who clearly did not consider them separate events.
A badge and a gun do not give these agents a license to kill.
The language escalated from there, and it escalated fast into words like fascism, dictatorship, and a comparison to secret police terrorizing communities. That is the vocabulary of a crowd that has decided the ordinary channels are not going to deliver anything.
We don't want this. We don't want executions in the street.
And then the line that explains why a coastal city of 20-odd thousand people produced this, when so many national stories produce nothing.
Someone was murdered on my street, a block away from where I live, a block away from where I work.
Proximity, that is the whole engine of Part 2. This did not happen on a screen. It happened on a road these people drive every day, and the body was in it.
We're not going to forget about this. We're not done talking about this, and this is only the beginning.
That was a promise made on the first day. It held up. What the details changed. By the second day, the story had stopped being only about 7 in the morning, because the details started arriving, and every one of them landed on a crowd that was already in the street. The first detail was the one that never softened, which is that he was not who they were looking for, and that the man who died had no connection to the removal or to the agents were there to serve. The second was his paperwork, because the fight over what to call him got complicated fast when both sides could describe the same man accurately and reach opposite conclusions. The third was the daughter, 3 years old, in the car, according to one account. And the fourth detail was the absence. No body cameras. In a case where the entire legal question is whether a vehicle accelerated toward an officer or was simply moving away, the footage that would settle it does not exist. What exists is a security camera that caught pieces, bystander video, and the word of the agents. That absence became the crack that everything else poured through. Investigations opened on 3 fronts. The Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General, the FBI, and Maine's own authorities, with Attorney General Aaron Frey, a Democrat, involved. Maine's 2 senators, Susan Collins, a Republican, and Angus King, an independent, both called for transparency and accountability. King went further, and he went at the structure of the thing itself, raising concerns about the credibility of federal agencies investigating themselves. That is a sitting senator saying out loud that he is not certain the referee is neutral. And once that idea is in the air, every finding that follows arrives pre-argued. Then came the detail that mattered most, because it was not a statement, it was an action. DHS ordered ICE to suspend most vehicle stops and to expand body camera use. Read that again slowly. The agency did not wait for the Inspector General. It did not wait for the FBI. It changed the 2 exact practices that had been at the center of the criticism, the vehicle stops and the missing cameras, while every one of those investigations was still open. Departments do not touch their own operational playbook in the middle of a news cycle unless something in that playbook is a problem. That was the moment the protests stopped being noise pushing against a wall and became noise that had moved one. But the state was not united behind them, and the second day proved it. On July 14th, outside the ICE facility in Scarborough, in the gap between Biddeford and Portland, an armed man walked into the middle of the demonstration. He wore a cowboy hat in the stars and stripes. He carried a handgun, visible in a holster, and reportedly pepper spray. He was there to support ICE, and he was, as far as the reporting shows, essentially alone. He argued, he confronted the crowd directly, moving through it, and at moments charging toward parts of it. Video shows heated verbal exchanges going both directions. He told the protesters to calm down with an expletive attached and pushed back on how they were handling themselves, while the crowd pushed back on him.
Stop touching me. Again. Stop touching me again.
The audio from those minutes is a mess of overlapping voices, and it is not always possible to tell who is speaking, but the temperature is unmistakable.
Get out of my way! Stop kicking them! Stop kicking them!
That is the sound of a crowd policing itself in real time, with people trying to hold others back while the confrontation is still happening.
No, you're not.
Threats of legal consequence, thrown back and forth, from people who had no idea whether any of it was true. And here is the fact that made this so tense for the organizers. He was not breaking the law by being there armed. Maine is a constitutional carry state, and open carry is legal. He had every right to stand on that ground with that weapon on his hip. The objection was never that it was illegal. The objection was that bringing a firearm into a grieving, furious crowd raises the odds that something happens that nobody can take back. Nothing did, no shots were fired, no injuries were reported from that clash, and no arrests came out of it. He was never publicly named in the major reports, though plenty of people online tried. His argument, though, was the argument, because online and across conservative commentary, the response to Biddeford had settled into a clear position. The man had entered the country illegally in 2023. The vehicle tried to flee. The agent fired at a car moving toward him. Under that reading, the shooting was self-defense, and the protesters were mourning a version of events they had not verified. So on those 2 days in that small stretch of Maine coast, both readings were standing on the same asphalt. One side saw an execution in the street. The other saw an officer with a car coming at him.
It's not right. They and everyone who supports them is on the wrong side of history.
This can't be the only day we're out in these streets. We have to be out in these streets every day, and we cannot get systemic change unless everyone steps up.
Neither side had the footage that would prove it. The details did not arrive first, and then produced protests. The two ran alongside each other for 48 hours straight, each one feeding the other. The crowd formed on the strength of what the neighbors already knew, and then the official details caught up, and every one of them made the crowd bigger. But there is a line that has not been crossed yet, and it needs saying plainly. Nothing has been determined. The sign said murder. The counter-protester said self-defense. The investigations by the Inspector General, the FBI, and the state of Maine are the only bodies that will produce a finding, and none of them has. The precise movement of that white car and the exact threat the agent faced or did not face remain under review. What is not under review is the rest of it. The man was not the target. The child was 3. The cameras were not there, and a state that mostly does not do this poured into the streets of Biddeford, Portland, Scarborough, Waterville, and Hallowell over a single morning that lasted a few seconds. The findings will come eventually. Maine did not wait for them, and the record now shows that not waiting changed something.